I'm Dianna Heldman. I'm the Associate Director of Vocal Performance in the Program of Music and Performing Arts Professions at the Steinhardt School at NYU. I came to music as a young child because I was encouraged by my parents to sing and to express myself, and coming from a family where we didn't have a lot of music, it was pretty much my mother around the piano playing just basic block chords and us singing away, and that's sort of how I found my voice and how I found my individuality as a person. And from there on, I sort of told my parents that I was going to be an opera singer. They didn't really know what that was. They were both educators, but they encouraged me and supported me all through my studies and in through the professional world of opera. Well, the first time I went to an opera, I thought it was pretty much the most boring thing I had ever seen. But then I was in one, and once I was in one, I got hooked. And I got hooked in the incredible expressive ability of a person's voice. My first recording was of Beverly Sills, and when I would listen to it, I could actually feel what she was singing about, even though I didn't speak French or German. It touched something inside of me that was a lot deeper. It touched my subconscious as a person, and it kind of drew me into trying to be able to express myself in that manner. Well, you look for a variety of things, and it's not necessarily the sound that they can produce. You look for a passion, a drive, an openness. How receptive are they to experimenting with all the different sounds that they can make? I think one of the most interesting things that I do as a teacher and a singing teacher is to help a person discover what their voice sounds like. We all enter this field because someone like Beverly Sills has inspired us. And in this day and age, students listen to music and they emulate and imitate it, and they are therefore imitating sort of a result. And I have to get them to kind of take a step backwards and start to investigate the process by which they come across their own unique sound. So I look for someone who is receptive to that idea. And a lot of times that means letting go of some concepts and ideals and experimenting with what their voice, their own unique instrument can do and will sound like. It requires someone who has a little bit of patience, who's enthusiastic about the process rather than the result at this point. You know, how much are you willing to come into my world and play? I think to be in this field, you have to be dedicated to it, and you have to be versatile. You have to be a well-rounded person. I really think that those make the best performers. I'm not interested so much solely in the person that has blinders onto everything else. You have to be patient, and it takes time, and the more things that come into your life to make you a more well-rounded person, the more that influences your ability to perform and communicate. I wish that there was more acceptance from one of the other. I wish they would make a divide. One of the very interesting things about our program, and the reason why we get a lot of people auditioning, is that we don't make that divide. Students come here and we say, well, why did you pick NYU? And they'll say, well, I don't know whether I want to do music theater or classical voice. And our response as a program is, well, why don't you're 18, why don't you give it time? Why don't you let your voice come into its own and tell you maybe where we should be going? So why don't at this point say, I think I want to do music theater. Fine, we'll put you in the musical theater program, but you can take any of the classical voice classes. You will study with a teacher who is classically trained. So you're going to get that ability to sing some classical music, and you can experiment with it and then make a decision. Why should someone who is 18 know exactly what they want? Why shouldn't they be given the freedom to experiment so that they can choose for themselves? And I think that's one of the things that sets our program apart from a lot of others. One thing that I can differentiate with classical singing toward opera and musical theater is that musical theater is a younger art form. People will graduate here with 4 years of college and should be able to get into a show, a regional theater show, and go right into some of the leading roles. In opera, the voice has to develop further. It's not until you're in your mid-20s, early 20s maybe, that you're ready to take on the demands of most operatic roles. And that's to say roles of Mozart and Handel. Most people don't come into the repertoire of Verdi until later, or Wagner until even later. There are always exceptions to that, but pretty much you have to be patient and be diligent in perfecting your craft through that very important time till you get to the point where you can sing some of that repertoire. A lot of singers meet their demise by singing repertoire that's too big and too heavy for them before they're ready, and that's unfortunate. Well, what is vocal technique? Vocal technique is an extension of what we already do naturally as humans, which is speak. So if you take that speaking process and you extend it so that the vowels are sustained, you have singing. Now, are there further alterations that go along that are indicative of classical singing? Yes, there are. There are concepts of resonance and articulation that take speech and heighten it even further, so it can carry a great distance. It has frequencies within it that cut through an orchestra. That's what classical singing has to have in order to be that sort of a presentation of sound. In musical theater, you also have different presentations of sound that the body can make. But I think that each person has to strive to what their individual unique sound is. I don't think anybody should strive to a generic imitation. I do Barbra Streisand, or I do Eileen Farrell, or I do this sort of singing. It should always be an individual sound. And every teacher, I think, good teachers strive to allow the person to discover what their sound is. And that is in a direct correlation to their personality. It has to be. If it isn't, I think there's an element of falsehood in it. Also, you have to remember that in musical theater, it's much more like speech because there's spoken dialogue. So you're going immediately from spoken dialogue into singing. So if the color of the voice and the personality of the voice isn't the same, all of a sudden you're hit with a different sound. You know, when a mother sings a lullaby to a baby, the more it sounds like her own speaking voice, the more comfort it offers the child, because that is the mother. You provide a specific amount of training, technical training, to the instrument to allow it to develop to the point where it does have those attributes, but never negating the natural sound of the instrument. You can't make no matter how much you train a trumpet player to try and sound like a trombone, he never will. He'll gain technique to play better as a trumpet player, but there's no way you're going to get him to sound like a trombone, because he isn't. Just like as hard as I try to imitate Jessie Norman, I can't. My instrument isn't the same size. It doesn't have the same attributes as hers. I'm of two minds of that. I believe that you should sing all sorts of musics. You should sing all sorts of songs. But if you're going to make a professional recording, I think you need to be sensitive to what the composer asks for. This is a fairly controversial subject. A lot of people in the opera field have made pop recordings. A lot of people in the pop field have kind of tried to do operatic performances in public and on recording. And I think they do the composer and the music a disservice, because it was intended to sound a specific way. And if you're not trained in that way, you're not really doing exactly what the composer and the librettist had asked you to. I think that when you teach, there's an interesting debate in teaching. Do you teach the person or the subject? And usually my answer is yes, because you have to be able to, you address both. To negate one is not to do your job. So by teaching a student how to take information and apply it, you're empowering them with a lot more skills than just how to sing a high note. You're teaching them to problem solve. You're teaching them to learn about themselves and how they function. How eager are they to engage you to get more information? How eager are they to start to teach themselves? you're empowering them so that when they go out in the world, even if they don't get into this field, they at least have certain skills, communicative skills, social skills, skills connected to this field that will allow them to do something in the field. Well, at this age, dealing with a freshman, I don't really know if they're going to make it to the Met. I think if they come in with specific vocal abilities, and they come in with that drive and personality and optimism, and they progress at a certain rate, then throughout the 4 years here, I'll have a better picture of where they're going to go. I don't think that I'm qualified to sit here and say you'll never sing at the Met. In fact, I don't think I'll ever say that. I don't think that that's not written anywhere on them. I'd like to think that everybody has the ability to get where they want to go. Some of them get halfway through this program and say, you know, this isn't for me. And certainly, if they've made that decision, my next job will be to say to them, well, what do you want to do? Let me help you discover that. Many of them go into a field that's related to this. Many of them will end up teaching, which horrifies them. Yeah. Well, when you have students who are in your studio, you can deal with that a different way, but this is how I deal with it. And the look on their faces, oh, I never want to do what you do. You know, I don't want to teach. But some of them do. And some of them, like myself, had careers singing and then came to teaching. And I love it just as much as I do performing. I teach them a very proactive pedagogical stance, because what I try to empower my students to do is solve their own problems. I try to send them out with a set of tools. You always need somebody else's ears every now and then. But I try to send them out with a set of tools so that when they go into a practice room or they're getting ready for an audition and something isn't functioning quite right, they have a list of things that they can go through to loosen that problem up, to address the problem, and to alleviate it. I think the most common problem that I have to address as a teacher of young singers is to get them to let go of old habits so that better habits can be instilled. So many students come into this program result-oriented. They come in with a sound that they identify as theirs, they own it, and it's usually pretty much about that big. And I say to them, well, why put yourself in a small box? Why don't we break down the walls and see what other sounds you are capable of making? And this is a difficult thing for them to do because it's like stripping away their identity. So you do it very gently. And you allow them to start to experiment with different sounds and different repertoire. And then very gradually they begin to relax into the realization that they aren't in a little tiny box, that they can do other things with their voice. They can be a versatile performer. They can sing a little piece of Scarlatti, and they can turn around and sing Night and Day. They can sing Broadway Baby, and they can sing a piece of Ricky Ian Gordon. They can be that versatile. Now, in the musical theater world, there's a lot of typing. I am this type. I am a belter. The musical theater world, more so than the opera world, really categorizes these students. So I also have to be cognizant that that's what the world is asking of them. So once I go ahead and break that down and build the technique, again, put them in the process of learning and ask them to stay in that process till we get to the end of the 4 years where we arrive at a result, their result. So keeping them engaged in the process is often hard because they're impatient. I want to get out there on that stage and make a big sound, a big impressive sound. Great, but for now, let's make moderate sounds that will enable you to strengthen your instrument so that you can get to that point. Getting them to be patient is hard. No, my teaching doesn't differ at all. My approach doesn't differ at all. The specific things that I ask a voice to do might be different. I'm going to be more apt to ask a musical theater student to sing a straight tone without vibrato than I am a classical voice student, because most classical voice students sing with vibrato all the time. Initially, every voice should make vibrato. Vibrato is nearly a manifestation of healthy singing. And then there are certain styles where you control it by means of taking it out. So that's a concept that might be different. I'm going to be asking my musical theater students to sing with a little less resonance and a little bit more volume than my classical voiced singers who are singing with more resonance. So their concepts vary. Because in our program we do something that I'm particularly proud of. I wrote and introduced a class called vocal production. Something that's always bothered me about teaching voice is it seems to be a lot of smoke and mirrors. We claim since we can't see it, it has sort of a mystic quality. Well, you know, dear, you should spin the sound behind your eyebrows and it will come out. And I'm saying, well, you know, that might be a good way to describe how it feels, but that's not actually what happens. So let's talk about what really happens. So every freshman in this program takes a class called vocal production. It's one semester and they learn the history of the voice, the physiology of the voice, and the function of the voice. And we're in an age right now that's very exciting to be a voice teacher because there's so much voice science out there. There are people studying the function of the larynx. There are people studying acoustics. And all of this is incredibly relative to today's singing voice. So every singer should be empowered with this information. There's no reason why a singer shouldn't know how the voice functions, just like a brass player or a reed player knows how their horn functions. So these kids know how the voice functions. When they go to a laryngologist, if they have a problem and the laryngologist says, well, your arytenoids are swollen, they know what the arytenoids are, and they know what they do to function to create a sound. So I'm trying to put out very intelligent singers who understand the function of their instrument. I think the only acoustics that I'm really interested in are the ones that are created inside the body. Those acoustics don't change. They are changing constantly while you sing, but those frequencies that identify my voice don't change. So I'm primarily interested in the acoustics at the instrument and within the instrument. Students get into a very live hall or with microphones and they tend to relax and kind of start to croon. That's a danger. I'm very excited about the fact that, with the idea that I can work with a music technology program here and get our students used to using microphones. That's very important because the music theater kids are going to be going out and somebody's going to strap a mic to them in their hair or on their clothes, and they're going to have to deal with what's coming back. They're also going to have to deal with the fact that someone's in a sound booth altering what's coming out. And that goes back to the original problem that I was talking about students coming in having imitated another singer. They're not only imitating the end result of that singer, they're imitating the result having been fed through a soundboard and put on a recording. So all of the glitches or sometimes even the unique sound has been taken out. So that's problematic. But again, the acoustic of the inside of the voice stays the same. Most classical singers will sing in an acoustically live, somewhat live place, but they too will find themselves in an audition or in a studio situation making a recording where the acoustics are pretty dead in the room. Then the only thing they have to rely on is the feeling and the sensation that's going on inside the body to prevent them from trying to over-sing, to create an acoustic that's not there. I had a wonderful conversation with another teacher named Jeanette Lavetrie, who does a lot of teaching here in the city for musical theater students. And she was talking to a sound engineer for, I think, Beauty and the Beast. And he found out that she was a voice teacher and made a remark that there was one singer in the cast who, whenever she came out on stage and sang, he sat back and didn't do anything, only to find out that she had classical training. She knew how to fill that harmonic spectrum with sound, and he didn't have to add anything. In fact, he would turn things down a little bit because she was relying on resonance to produce the sound and not volume. Sometimes I go to shows here on Broadway and I'm so discouraged because everything seems to be the same color and it's all loud and it doesn't seem to matter about nuance. Even the love ballads are so loud that I think there's no intimacy in that at all. They can hear it across the street. So it's very discouraging when you work so hard to build nuance into the voice and then you go in and You hear a live production that's being fed through a soundboard and it's gone. It's pretty sad. You know, I think if I had to say there were heroes in my life, I'd probably say the singers that I emulated, such as Frederica von Stade, Eileen Farrell, Beverly Sills, and I'd have to, even though he can't carry a tune in a bucket, put my father in that mix, because he was the one who encouraged me to be an individual, to seek out what I loved. Both my parents are educators. My dad taught education, my mother taught kindergarten. Their job was to nurture what I fell in love with. And so that has to go into the mix. I think that's pretty important. And also I had some fantastic voice teachers who also looked at me as a person and asked me what I loved about singing and nurtured me in that capacity. That's important. I have to remember when I work with a student to ask them why they love singing, and I have to remind them that it is a joyous experience. It has to be. If it's not joyous, and if you don't feel fulfilled in doing it, then don't do it. It's a chore. And music should never be a chore. My advice to kids who are pursuing a creative life is not to lose the passion among everything else that's going on around you, and to find a path to follow. Set yourself a path to follow, and don't start at the end. Keep the end in sight, but if you're in high school and you have aspirations toward being an opera singer, listen to as many opera singers as you can. Languages, study dance, study theater. Begin to study singing gently with appropriate repertoire, and set yourself up an incredibly good foundation. And that includes a support system, teachers, parents, friends, who will keep you engaged and remind you of what your passion is during the down times in that. But stick to that path and don't deviate from it. That would be my advice.